Hi, welcome to this session. We have with us Ms. Deepa Prahalad. She's innovation consultant and one of the leading design thinking gurus in the world. She has worked with several startups and large multinationals and has co-authored the book Predictable Magic: Unleash the Power of Design Strategy to Transform Your Business, which was in fact selected as the best design books of the year by Fast Company. She writes frequently for Harvard Business Review, Business Week, and several other top magazines. Deepa, welcome to the summit.
Thank you for having me, Kumar. Great to be here.
Deepa, it's obviously been a very, very trying time and a time of disruption. And what are some of the key skills that leaders need in these times and are exhibiting?
Well, I think one of the things that really is distinguishing the leaders who are going to be really effective and respected going forward are the ones who really have this ability to become systems thinkers. I think we are in a stage where we really have to understand the interconnectedness of many of the issues that we're dealing with, rather than focusing solely on boosting our own organizational performance. We have to look much more carefully at the ecosystems, just as the crisis in 2008 was labeled a man-session financial crisis, disproportionately affected men. We really have to understand that all of these crises have structural components that affect different populations in very different ways. I mean, in the US, for example, now no one calls themselves a stay-at-home mom. They've coined the term a stuck-at-home mom. When your children are at home, we're seeing disproportionate impact on women and children from this crisis. And I think we've had almost 20 years of really being focused on the consumer and design and a lot of these things, but we're really now having the need to look very deeply across the chain, understanding who is essential, what jobs and what duties we need to think about much more carefully, whether it's healthcare workers to grocery store employees. You see in India, for example, this really amazing response from civil society as many migrant workers had to make their way back from big cities. And I think that ability to agonize about issues of fairness and equity is going to really distinguish the leaders who are able to drive change, because those fundamental questions of fairness are not going to go away immediately. We're looking at burgeoning inequality. And even when we have a vaccine, for example, these very fundamental questions of who gets it, who needs to wait. All of those things are not obvious answers. Those are things we're going to have to debate and struggle with quite a bit. And that key ability, I think, is very critical to be an effective leader.
And in times of crisis, such as the one we are going through right now, what are some of the key sort of areas you think leaders and organizations can focus on? How can they cope with it? How can they actually emerge maybe stronger?
Well, one thing, even on an individual basis and certainly on a corporate basis, is I think crisis forces all of us to be makers. People intuitively understand they have to not just think differently, but do things differently. So on an individual basis, you see a lot of people suddenly, cooking, crafting, knitting, revisiting their passions and strengthening their relationships. And you see the same thing on the corporate level. There really has to be a level to reach out much more deliberately and much more consistently toward a much wider swath of people than we normally do. We always keep in touch with our customers and we always keep in touch with our key suppliers. But I think this really deliberate trying to understand how all of our actions could be more helpful, how we could redeploy our existing resources is incredibly important. And I think another interesting thing that's happening is people used to always focus on performance and then think, well, in the long term, this is the societal impact I hope to have. And crisis sometimes forces us to reverse that equation and say, no, let's be very explicit and very deliberate and very transparent about the societal impact we are trying to have, and then worry a little bit more about the profits, and that becomes the long-term issue. And you've seen simple things like, you know, distillers redeploying and making hand sanitizer, but now you're seeing lots more really creative solutions with technology, looking at how we can increase equity, not knowing exactly when this crisis will end and what our new normal might really look like. I think a lot of people are starting to become much more creative and reaching out for new connections and new networks, which I think is really positive. And we also fundamentally need a new narrative. And I see a lot more effort towards saying, what is the very purpose of organizations? What are we here for? Who are we answerable to? So in a very real sense, this crisis represents an acceleration of longstanding trends toward looking at, okay, how do we marry our core mission and whatever social purpose we're trying to have much more consistently and closely?
That's a great thought. And, you know, clearly, as some people and organizations are viewing the times that we are in as an opportunity to reset, to do things differently, to do newer things. And you also spoke about the benefit of being creative. And as a design thinking guru, you obviously speak a lot about art and design in our lives and in organizations. What are some of the key areas where you think art and design can play a huge role, and their relevance in coming up with great solutions?
I do realize that this seems, you know, if you're in a bank, for example, it seems quite a little bit off topic to suddenly start looking at art. But let me tell you why I think that this is such an important aspect, especially now, because we don't have a script for this particular crisis. We can look back to the flu pandemic. We, we can take some lessons from that. But what's really interesting about art is, by definition, it's about experimentation. And we have a lot of competing information, a lot of competing ideas. And the interesting thing about art is that it's really, by definition, a process of synthesis. We're not here, well, you don't create great art by listing pros and cons, right? You have to take a lot of ideas, synthesize them, and create something that's easily understood and valued by a very large audience. We also know that this is creating untold stress on so many people, no matter how comfortable you are economically. There's a huge amount of anxiety, which I know you're an expert on, Kumaar. You talk a lot about mental health, and there are proven benefits to act of being creative, and also looking at art and listening to music has a meditative effect on calming us, making us more able to cope with the challenges that we face. The other really interesting thing about art is that to create something, even if you're knitting a scarf or you're making a meal, you have to imagine a beginning, middle, and end. And I think in a lot of ideation sessions, we get really excited with our initial idea. And as things go out into the world, they have a lot of unintended consequences, certainly in tech, in medicine, in many other things. And artists have to look at the whole story in order to create. And I think that discipline is going to be very important. And it teaches you patience. Even if you have a great idea, it takes some time to execute. And that's a great discipline to bring into our organizations. And in countries like India, I think there's a particularly interesting aspect to our artistic traditions, because if you look at our history, you have a lot of conquest, you have colonization for 200 years, you have a lot of painful episodes. At the same time, from all of those, we have some of the most amazing artistic traditions, wonderful music, amazing food, textiles, paintings. And I think that remembering how to translate even painful episodes and still create harmony. And the artist is not focused on efficiency. The artist really is oriented on harmony and beauty. And I think that captures what, the CEO of the Girl Scouts, who's 105, I was online for her 105th birthday, and she said, our organization is about creating tradition with a future. That we take these aspects that we treasure, but we bring them into the next century, we make them more inclusive. And I think that's a really wonderful thing that art does for us.
That's amazing because what you're really saying is that management or even leadership has to now start taking leaves, not just on a token or one-off basis from other faculties, right? But at a more ingrained level. So design thinking is not just about systems, but literally also about some of the artistic and creative endeavors and how we can incorporate that into day-to-day management via rituals or via small hands-on activities as well. you know Now we are all sort of working from home, and it seems like this is going to be continuing for a while now in most parts across the world, with several companies even declaring that a large parts of their organization will be free to work from home indefinitely. What role do you see design thinking, playing in having a better work from home experience? And I would, in fact, even say a learning from home experience, because now we all have to work and learn on the job at home. So, how can we get some good design thinking ideas from you on this?
Well, one of the things that is interesting is that everyone's stuck at home, right? The idea of working from home originally, as it was imagined, was with the children going off to school and with everybody else being away, and you having this concentrated time and the convenience of missing your commute. So no one's sitting on the beach in this crisis, except maybe some lucky few. But I think this is again a chance to integrate our work and life much more closely. And as we design technology, we really have to immediately understand what is the physical reality. And I think that will really create more robust systems for the firms that care to do so. I see some really interesting things actually in places like India. They've always kind of understood that, well, we need to empower women. We have, I think, a little bit of lead time in understanding that everyone's not going to go to an office. And if we want to help people, let's start with where they are and build from there. And that's a fairly new discipline because the office has been the great equalizer in many other parts of the world. So I think we're going to have to focus on people's contribution and character, not just their qualifications, right? We're going to be able to take input from how everyone is reacting to this. So we actually have the ability to test ideas immediately. People, if we're designing something for the family, we can bring the kids in and see their reaction immediately. But I think the more interesting part of this is that, especially when it's come to emerging markets and a lot of the education, a lot of the qualifications, a lot of the use of technology has in many cases unintentionally shamed people, made them feel like, okay, you know what, I need to depart from where I came from, what I've been brought up to believe in order to succeed. And here people are at home and they're coming up with very interesting ways to use technology and almost hacking the idea of privilege in the process. So let me give you an example. I mean, why do all of us want to go to school and get a big job is also this desire to be heard and respected and to be part of a bigger community that has a voice. Now, I saw this really interesting case of this Maharashtrian grandmother who's 70 years old. Her name is Suman Damne. And her 15-year-old grandson said, you know what, Grandma, I love your recipes. So I am going to go and videotape you showing people how to prepare traditional bakarwadi and all these nice preparations. And she has now won a YouTube Creators Award. She's created about 120 videos. She has 8 million downloads a month, 4,000 subscribers. And what's really interesting is people loved her videos, and then they started saying, well, we don't get the blends of spices you're describing in your videos. They just so happen to have a 30-acre farm. So now she is packaging her own spice mixtures and selling this. So the time to kind of monetize this project has been 6 months during lockdown. And you see so many organizations have struggled for years to create a few of these success stories. And many of the gender and generational issues are being addressed almost organically. And you're bringing the family closer together, not saying we need to find the talented students and take them away from everything they were raised with so that they understand what success is. We've given them the respect. We've given them the regard. We've preserved something of our culture for all of us in the process. So I hope we see more of that, because as technology first went out there, it was just seen as a convenience. But what I've always said for years is that, people go onto the internet to see what they can buy, and they stay to discover what they can be. And we're starting to see that, and I think people will come forward with things none of us could have ever imagined, and I'm really excited about that.
Those are some great thoughts, Deepa. And clearly, I think if we put sort of that lens on of creativity and art and design and use it for, solution design or problem solving, I think, both corporations and individuals and our work from home lives could look quite different and better coming out of the pandemic. Well, thank you so much for joining us in the summit. And I know it's a really ungodly hour for you. You have
no,
to
not at all.
early. We have to wake up too early to do this. But thank you so much.